Yep. Now, the impacts of terrorism. Sorry. Explain the impacts of terrorism. Terrorism does have an impact on societies. It can affect not just governments, but also communities across the world. It can affect the change of policy, how people think, how societies can be governed. For example, the two notable terrorist attacks that has had a major impact on the world was the Christchurch and the 9/11 September terrorist attack. The Christchurch terrorist attack sent shockwaves around the world because how can a small, peaceful country like New Zealand can be affected by terrorism? What else was surprising, he was able to live stream the whole event on Facebook. And only just last week, when I was actually researching the Christchurch terrorist attack, a boy in Singapore wanted to mimic this Christchurch attack. But thank God he was apprehended by the government agencies. And that just shows how dangerous online extremism has involved. The 9/11 terrorist attack, the biggest terrorist attack in human history, struck right at the heart of the United States soil. The 9/11 terrorist attack changed the United States domestic and foreign policies, thus beginning the war on terror, which has come with consequences, particularly with the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, I'm sure, I don't know if much of you remember it, but I definitely remember the 9/11 attack. I'm sure people like Mambak Tea, Mambak Ita will remember those kinds of things. Um, Now, how has Indonesia? Sorry, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry, the third slide, the back one slide. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Uh, Now, how has Indonesia been affected by terrorism? The war on terror is clearly the defining factor. Majority of Indonesians did have negative views on Western countries invading invade did have negative views on Western countries because of the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. It did lead to many civilians being killed. The estimated account is around 244,000 to 266,000. It's also had the war on terror also had because since the 2002, coming back to Indonesia, the war on terror after the 2002 Bali bombing led to Indonesia enacting many repressive policies by the parliament. But just like many other countries like Indonesia, Indonesia is also concerned with radical terrorist groups because they can alter Indonesia's social and political order. N- notable Notable terrorist groups, such as, for example, the Jemaima Islamiyah, who are linked to Al Qaeda. And after 9/11, the group has played a major role in number of bombing operations in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Singapore. Now, what makes Jemaima Islamiyah a distinctive terrorist group among others in the southeast region is the group had the regional scope of operations, a broader political goal, a close working tie with Al Qaeda, and the group had a very sustained bombing operation, which operated around mid 2000 to mid 2004. Jemaima Islamiyah, sorry, next slide on Jemaima Islamiyah, sorry. Yep. Jemaima Islamiyah's goal is to establish an Islamic state or a regional caliphate within Southeast Asia. Abu Bakr Basir, has we recently learned, who has just been released, was viewed as the group's spiritual leader. He has played a prominent role in educating and exploiting young individuals who wanted and forcing them to resort to violence. Now, this is one of the challenges Indonesia faces because how radical leaders are able to brainwash these young people. In Indonesia, the reason why individuals join terrorist groups is either because of boredom, strong bonds amongst teachers and peers, and the insightful messages preached by radical clerics for terrorist groups. It is why Jemaima Islamiyah are able to re-emerge from societies and why they have a strong recruitment base. Now, and these are one of the challenges Indonesia faces. Next slide, please. Now, now coming to Indonesia's counterterrorism steps, I will break it down into two approaches that that Indonesia has approached. One of them is the soft approach and the hard approach towards terrorism. We can first start with the hard approach towards terrorism in Indonesia's counterterrorism force, for example, known as Detachment 88 or Densus 88, are one of Indonesia's best counterterrorism force and also in the world. However, Densus 88 has come under scrutiny because they have been abused human rights abuse. Indonesia's counterterrorism laws have also been criticized because it also undermines the freedom of speech in the country. And the recent government actions for banning Islamic prominent groups is seen as controversial. This has mainly increased and played out by the President Jokowi's administration. And experts are trying to take note that President Jokowi has been adopting illiberal policies, testing Indonesia's institutions. Now, moving down to Indonesia's soft approach, analysts towards Indonesia's de-radicalization programs and counter-violence extremism, for example, or CVE, experts have voiced their concern that Indonesia is in need of serious reform in the de-radicalization and CVE programs because individuals who are bored or are either brainwashed by their teachers or preachers are prime targets for terrorist groups. And this is not just Islamic terrorism. This is seen a lot in many other terrorist groups, such as white supremacist terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK in America. And it is important to analyze what these approaches are and how do they work. Do these goals accomplish in countering terrorism? Um, next slide, please. Thank you. Now, President Jokowi, when he entered office in 2014, has enacted many repressive policies in his presidency. President Jokowi's administration has weakened human rights organizations and also weakened the corruption agencies. However, the latest push from banning Islamic political groups such as Islamic Defender Front or Islamic Plembeba Front has been met with controversy by seen as shutting criticism against the government. However, his latest policy that he forced to push through parliament was the counterterrorism bill known as the 483I, which allows the military to be involved against terrorism. Having the military involved against terrorism does come with high risks because military clashes against terrorist groups does have a high civilian casualty rate. Again, for example, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Yemen war. The military operation in central Sulawesi, where the military was supposed to eliminate an extremist terrorist group called the East Indonesian Mujahideen, came at a high price by the local population. Nasrim article, who wrote about the military operations in Sulawesi, stated that having produced so many victims without resolving any of the deep-rooted issues at stake, the security-based and militarized approach to fighting terrorism should be replaced with citizen-based mediation strategy, guided by the principles of justice and humanity. Sadly, when we try to push these kinds of more civilian approach to countering terrorism, it's always the military has been pushed to government in order to seen as a better counteractive force to counterterrorism. I mean to terrorism. Now, the reenactment of the military only pushes Indonesia into post-authoritarianism, because and bringing it back to the Suharto era. And it is why we must analyze Densus 88 and which has been successful, but has also come under criticism. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right. So Densus 88, Indonesia's counterterrorism force, is one of the best in the world, which has come as a surprise. Now, the reason and Densus 88 has been successful in arresting 800 jihadists since 2002, and in 2017, the agency has thwarted 15 attacks and arrested 150 individuals. Now, how has Densus 88 can accomplish such a feat is because the agency does not just rely on officers' intelligence. The agency has worked with communities, winning the hearts and minds of the people in the region by closely working with local councils and religious leaders. The group have been invested by the United States and Australia and cooperates and coordinates with the Australia's counterterrorism agencies, for example, the Australian Federal Police or AFP. Despite these accomplishments, Dennis 88 have been accused of human rights abuse, such as judicial killings, torturing of prisoners, tampering of evidence, and interfering with defense lawyers. The own Indonesian government human rights organization called the National Hak Asasi Manusia has admitted to Dennis 88 excessive use of force. These draconian measures do have consequences because not only torture programs are banned by the United Nations Human Rights Organization, torture does not work, and it is a clumsiest coercive technique to use against suspected terrorists. Torture also harms the victim's physical and mental well-being. Victims are far more likely to produce false information, and tortured civilians will produce any information to avoid being tortured. There's actually evidence shows that a majority of people who were captured and tortured were just innocent civilians. And even though the Bush administration tried to justify this torturing program by saying how it works, it's been debunked by many experts. And it just shows why it is frowned upon by the United Nations. Now, the excessive use of force has been a blowback because the victims or their supporters are far more likely to be radicalized and will be committed to attack the state. For example, in 2016, a death of Jemima Islamemia member named Soyono sparked outrage and demanded accountability from Densis 88. Research shows how that consequential hard approaches can be devastating and why Indonesia is in need of drastic de-radicalization and prison reform. Because individuals who are tortured are far more likely to feel anger against the state. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to the soft approach, Indonesia needs drastic de-radicalization programs and prison reform. The threat of radical terrorist groups is continuing to evolve with the spread of violent ideologies. It is important to know why individuals join terrorist groups and the four factors that was highlighted by Julie Chernoff Hwang, who I've used a lot in this de-radicalization program paragraph. The four factors include relationships, personal crisis, social media, and external factors. Finding this and people who meet strong connections with the wrong crowd is also a very bad sign. In Indonesia, it is the relationship of how individuals are bonded by their friends and their teachers. Relationship by their teachers show that these students, for example, these students can be easily radicalized. And the reason why Jemima Islamia have taken a stance by towards their education, and why they have a wider supportive space. Radical preachers such as, like I mentioned before, Abu Bakr Bashir played a prominent role. Immediate education reform is needed to combat these radical preachers, and steps such as installing Muslim leaders to shut down these radical preachings have proven to be useful. The second step that will be needed to de-radicalize individuals is who have either been arrested or disengagement from the terrorist groups. Individuals who are in prison can be de-radicalized by teaching the correct teachings of Islam. Reports of individual in a book called by Julie Hwang, Why Terrorists Quit. They have admitted that the Bali bombings was wrong because innocent children have died. Genesis 88 helped these individuals to broaden their perspective onto Islam and made them question whether their violence they committed was right. The last de-radicalization method is immediately becoming involved into individuals who have disengaged from terrorist organizations. And these individuals need immediate assistance. Good assistant prison sentence and helping the person back into society can be beneficial for society and into the community. For example, Yusuf Adir Rama has become a media star in a cafe as a cook set up by NGOs in Sulawesi. We must remember these individuals have disengaged from radical terrorist groups. And and becoming either befriended from someone or realizing or befriending with someone who has pulled them out of that group or realizing that the group have joined a cult. It just shows these people, if you moment you interfere with them, the moment you help them, they're willing to pull away from that society. With the rise of social media and the adoption of dangerous tactics such as lone wolf terrorism, it is imperative Indonesia boosts its de-radicalization program and countering violent extremism. Terrorism, like I said before, is not the overall threat towards Indonesia like climate change, but it does have an effect towards policies in the Indonesia's governance. Indonesia is the largest democratic country in the Southeast Asian region. And with the United States and China trying to exert their influence in the Southeast region, Indonesia will be the main state actor in the stage. However, the repressive policies by the Indonesian parliament are a test to Indonesia's democratic institutions, and the use of military as an excessive force against terrorism is a move towards post-Suharto's authoritarianism era. The ongoing threats, such as the involvement of online extremism and lone wolf tactics, provides a challenge because it is hard to predict these kinds of threats, especially since these individuals are undetected and can provide the lethal force. I don't know if you guys know, but I'm sure you heard of the Anders Breivik, one of a lone wolf terrorist who was able to commit a mass uh, terrorist attack against in Norway. He was able to slip under the radar because he was able to be operated by amongst himself. So it just shows how lone wolf terrorism is starting to be adopted by many terrorist groups. Um, counterterrorism agency counterterrorism agencies such as Census 88 must take into account its accountability and whether these hard approaches is necessary, even though it comes under the cost of human rights abuse. The soft approach to de-radicalization needs reform, especially through education and the prison sector, because it is an effective method towards combating violence and hateful messages. Radical Islam will be a test to Indonesia's democracy and how it will affect the relationship between the politics, security, and terrorism. Indonesia's future is to be seen as a country, and whether Indonesia's democracy will last or will be tested for that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dave, for such elaborate presentation. So moving on, we will have a second presentation from Megan. Megan, you could share your presentation by yourself.
Yeah. Let me just try. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, we could see.
How do I make it full size? Sorry, 2 seconds. How's that?
It's already full screen.
Full screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, my name is Megan Connelly. I go to the same university as Dave, Murdoch University in Western Australia. And we're studying the same thing as well, a global security bachelor. My presentation is similar to Dave's in some ways, so I apologize if I do kind of repeat some of the aspects that Dave was talking about. Oh, hang on, that's not the first slide. Here we go. There you go. Yeah, so radical Islam. I'll be discussing if Indonesia's democracy is strong enough, the relationship between politics, security, and terrorism in Indonesia. So I'd just like to start by saying that this research has only been a few weeks. We've only been with this internship for a short time. A true understanding of this relationship would likely take a lot more research and more insights from experts. And I've been conscious in my research that I'm not Indonesian, and my understanding on culture and on specific religions is still lacking. I can only present what I've found so far. I recently found in my research as well that the term Jamaah Islamiyah is controversial in Indonesia. Apparently, it means Islamic community or congregation, and it was subject to previous New Order manipulation. And with that, I hope that my presentation distinguishes between radical and extremist groups from the community as a whole. Okay, defining terrorism. A true universal definition of terrorism does not currently exist, nor will it likely ever. It can be argued that a true objective definition of terrorism that distinguishes it from other forms of political violence and is politically unbiased cannot ever be formed. The reasoning for this in academic debate is largely based on terrorism being contextually determined. What makes one act marked as terrorism and another similar act not is what makes labeling and defining terrorism as one strict objective term an issue. Whereas the opposing argument can be made that a definition that is broad and overgeneralized could label some political acts as terrorism, which could be argued are not terrorist acts. While discussing terrorism, we must keep this in mind. Okay, Indonesia's anti-terrorism law of 2002 does give a description of terrorism. This is not a definition, it's just a description. Any person who, by intentionally using violence or threats of violence, creates a widespread atmosphere of terror or fear or causes mass casualties by taking the liberty or lives and property of other people or causing damage or destruction to strategic vital objects, the environment, public facilities or international facilities, faces the death penalty or life imprisonment or between 4 and 20 years imprisonment. This law does not define terrorism in any strict sense, but instead claims that the crime of terrorism can be any act that fulfills elements of the crime under this law. There are critical terms left undefined and therefore subjective to various interpretations, such as widespread atmosphere of terror or fear. The vague terms included in this description has been criticised for being applicable to various cases that may not involve terrorism. The continued pressure from political Islam has been a developing issue in Indonesia for many years. Radical extremist Islamist groups continue to create fear through terror tactics around Indonesia. Political Islam threatens Indonesia's democracy. An academic perspective on this is important to understand the limitations of the Indonesian government and the extremity of the threat they face. Radical Islam is an ongoing historical issue and can be argued to be empowered by Indonesia's democracy. An exploration of this is indeed necessary towards counterterrorism tactics and how Indonesia faces this threat. In the academic world, there lacks a consensus on the definition of radical Islam. Discussion is therefore important to gain understanding of the concept and motives behind radicalized groups. Political Islam is upheld by the current democracy in Indonesia and yet is also a threat to its very existence. Okay, a history of terrorism in Indonesia, just quickly. Cases of modern terror attacks in Indonesia go back to the 1970s and even in the 60s. Early cases of terrorism do show religious and political motives. Early 2000s cases, such as the Bali bombings in October 2002, the Marriott Hotel in Jakarta in August 2003, the Australian Embassy in Jakarta in September 2004, and Bali bombings again in October 2005. These cases all have common ground, as they were committed by radical Islamist groups, particularly Jamaah Islamiyah. These radical groups hold a disdain for Westerners and their ideals. The Bali bombings in 2002 was a series of 3 bombers separately attacking locations around Bali at the same time. These bombings caused the death of over 2002 people, 88 were Australians and 38 were Balinese. The other incidents around this time had similar anti-Western motives. Abu Bakr Bashir He was the head of the Jamaah Islamiyah, sorry if I'm butchering that name, a radical and extremist Muslim group. He was jailed in 2005, but his conviction was overturned. Bashir has continued to deny being involved in the 2002 terrorist attack. He was sentenced to 15 years for unrelated crime in 2011 and has now been released, serving only 9 years. Sorry guys, that's the dog. Several members of Jamaah Islamiyah linked to the 2002 bombings have been jailed and others killed by security forces. It has been argued that his release is unlikely to suddenly increase the risk of terrorism in Indonesia. However, he is still very much able to preach and is under no restrictions from doing so. In 2014, while he was in prison, Bashir pleaded his allegiance to the Islamic State and its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. According to Jones 2019, President Joko Widodo's decision to release Bashir violated standard regulation when Bashir did not need to sign a loyalty pledge to the government. Regulation 99 of 2012 from the Ministry of Law and Human Rights, which makes the early release for certain categories of offenders, including convicted terrorists, contingent on their willingness to sign a written loyalty oath to the Indonesian government. Abu Bakr Bashir was exempt from signing this. More recent attacks in Indonesia, there have been around 7 in the last 3 years, maybe more, but that's what I've found. In May 2018, there was a series of attacks involving family suicide bombings. This was the first time Indonesia had seen women and children involved in the perpetration of suicide bombings. This particular series of attacks began on the 9th of May 2018. Terrorism inmates from the Jamaah Ansurat Dullah group in detention center staged a riot. It resulted in the death of 5 police officers and 1 inmate. The detention center was heavily guarded by elite counter-terrorism officers and served as the local headquarters of the Mobile Brigade Corps, a paramilitary unit of the National Police. On the 13th of May 2018, suicide bombers, including a mother and her 2 children, bombed 3 churches in Surabaya, killing and injuring dozens of people. The same night, a bomb shook an apartment complex, killing at least 3 of the same family. On the 14th of May 2018, suicide bombers targeted the police gate of Surabaya. At least 10 people, including 4 policemen and 6 civilians, were wounded in the attack. 4 suicide bombers were also killed. The Surabaya attacks, which included suicide bombings by mothers and their young children, shocked both the public and Indonesia's political leaders. Only 2 days later, on the 16th of May 2018, a police station was attacked by 5 individuals armed with swords. 1 attacker drove off after hitting and killing a police officer with a car. 4 others attacked using swords and injured 2 police officers. 4 of the attackers were later killed when the driver was captured by the police. A few months ago, on the 28th of November 2020, a terrorist attack by a radical Islamist group on Christians in Indonesia resulted in 4 people killed, 2 of them beheaded and 2 of them burned. Terrorism in Indonesia is still a major threat. Current and recent attacks prove that the counter-terrorism measures in Indonesia are not efficient enough to subside this threat. Is Indonesia equipped to deal with future attacks? After terrorism attacks in the past, Indonesia has dealt with the fallout. After the 2018 attacks, the anti-terrorism law was revised within 9 days after the last attack. This was proposed to take around 2 years, but it was rushed through. For the world's largest Muslim majority country, where many of its citizens have embraced an Islamic identity previously suppressed under authoritarian rule, The law's definitions and powers had been highly contested previously. An analysis written by Harapin Andiana and Priyam Zirika, entitled The Politics of Counterterrorism in Post-Authoritarian States, Indonesia's Experience from 1998 to 2018, discusses the counterterrorism efforts in Indonesia and how they have been influenced. A lecturer at Murdoch University, my home university, Dr. Ian Wilson, once told us that there are no terrorist organizations, there are only political groups that use terrorism as a tactic. This is important to understanding the link between terrorism and politics in Indonesia. The motives of these groups are politically charged and stem from a discomfort with Indonesian democracy. Future counterterrorism efforts in Indonesia need to deal with the political side first. What is the threat to Indonesia's democracy? Is democracy failing in Indonesia? Indonesia was a model of democratic transition for many years, especially for countries with Muslim populations. Liberalism and perhaps even tolerance in Indonesia can be seen to be under threat today. Tim Lindsay, in his article, Retreat from Democracy, The Rise of Islam and the Challenge for Indonesia, argues that the liberal democracy is in contest with the Muslim conservatives. He points out the paradox that the voices of tolerance, which sought to present Indonesia as a Muslim democracy, now face opposition from Muslim conservative intolerance, empowered by that very democracy. This is a concept that I've picked up on over a number of academic journals and articles. Lindsay pinpoints flaws in Indonesian democracy, including corruption, defective human rights courts, and pressure from the elite. There are many groups opposed to Indonesia's democracy, including hardliners, the wealthy, survivors of Suharto's regime, and elements of the armed forces as well. These groups have very little in common with one another. However, they can come together against liberal democracy to intimidate progressive civil leaders. The new label for Indonesia's political sphere has not yet emerged. Reformasi ended, and yet the new term has not appeared. Tim Lindsay suggests a slide into a neo-new order, which other critics argue is too extreme, and Lindsay himself recognises the harshness of this term. Within the Muslim community, there is a struggle between moderates and conservatives over the nature of Indonesian Islam and its manifestations in political and social structures, institutions, and culture. As Shira Lowenberg argues, two starkly different futures for Indonesia are envisioned by the opposing factions. One wants to continue the democratic Indonesia of today, where no single religion has primacy over the other, while the other wishes for a state that reflects the majority Muslim demographic by being governed under Islamic law. Most scholars agree it's unlikely that Indonesia will formally be an Islamic state anytime soon. Part of the Indonesian state ideology or political consensus is the belief in one God. In the amended version of the 1945 Constitution, Article 29 states that the state is based on the belief in one and only God. The state guarantees all persons the freedom to embrace a religion and worship according to their religion or belief. Article 28E also states that every person is free to embrace a religion and to worship according to his or her choice. In Vendi Hadiz's Towards a Sociological Understanding of Islamic Radicalism in Indonesia, 2008, he discusses radical Islam as being deeply rooted in contemporary world order. Hadiz makes comparisons between the fear of political Islam with the growing discomfort surrounding the state of democracy in Indonesia. In the past, organized Islam has been a major source of opposition to democracy and appointed leaders. This pressure continues to threaten Indonesia's democracy. There seems to be a consensus among scholars on this, that the democracy of Indonesia is being threatened. Political Islam. Blasphemy laws in Indonesia are just one example of political Islam being put at an advantage by democracy. There are increasing limitations of free and securitization of governance. They include political activism, including demonstrations, social media campaigns and lobbying, accusations of blasphemy, and legal reform to gradually impose laws and norms based on conservative Islamic values. These include restrictions on clothing, public expressions of sexuality, and the banning of alcohol, among many others. As a model for this approach, many look to Malaysia. The jailing of Ahok in 2017, who was the Jakarta governor, demonstrates this problem. President Joko Widodo and his government struggled to respond effectively. They have been argued by scholars to have been intimidated by the attacks on the governor and even the calls for ending Jokowi's presidency as well. The governor lost his election and was jailed under blasphemy laws. The future of terrorism and the future of Indonesia. A survey of the State Islamic University in Jakarta found that 33% of young Muslims believed that that acts of intolerance against minorities were not an issue. 34% believed that atheists should be killed. The State Islamic University links these opinions to the rise of social media and the internet. There is a Muslim cyber army, a group which are active on all social media platforms. They have been found to have some success at manipulating online opinion. Terror attacks will continue to evolve and shock. Counterterrorism operations around the world have been effective in minimizing the ability for large coordinated terror attacks to occur. Coercive military operations such as targeted killings, drone strikes, lengthy military battles, cyber monitoring, and all over heightened security have made these large-scale coordinated attacks by radical Islamist groups harder than ever to orchestrate. Some would say the lone wolf attacks are the newest rising issue. This can be argued to have been the result of successful and effective coercive military operations against terrorism around the world. Lone wolf attacks are hard to counter and still pose a threat to the world and to Indonesia, as they are really difficult to deflect. It is clear among many scholars that Indonesia will not overnight turn into an Iran-style Islamic theocracy. There is belief that Indonesia's slide from democracy is happening gradually. Indonesia may soon resemble a Malaysian-style illiberal democracy that privileges Islam and denies rights to vulnerable communities. Thank you. Sorry, you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you, Megan and Dave. Such a great presentation. We will move on to Q&A section. I think for all the participants who wants to ask or who wants to discuss or give comment, could use the raise hand feature, or you could use chat if you want to show your face, or maybe you are more would be more comfortable in chat. Anyone who wants to ask? Wait. As we wait for any questions and maybe comments from participants, so I think it's a great presentation from two of our intern. Oh yeah, there is a question from some student. Yeah. You could ask.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Mbak. Great explanation for Dave and Megan. It was very interesting topic to discuss in this occasion. I would like to ask one question to both of you. How do you consider the approaches for Indonesian government, uh, each soft or hard approach to handle the terrorism in Indonesia regarding to the human rights issue? Uh, Actually, Dave had talked about the human rights a little bit in his review recently. But I want to hear more from Dave and Megan uh, from the point of view of human rights. How do you consider the soft approach and hard approach to the Indonesian government to tackle or to cope the terrorism? As you said that this is a big issue or serious issue in Indonesia in this term and in the future. Thank you very much.
Megan would like to answer or me?
Feel free to go first.
Okay. I'll answer first. Terima kasih on the question. Sorry, your name was Sama. Sorry.
Mr. Shamsuddin.
It's Mr.
Sam, yeah, Sam.
Samshuddin.
Yeah.
Sorry. How human rights, the way I believe that can work with the Indonesian government or any country armed forces, they can actually be has a good advice towards them by um, being a major role and being imperative right there when in briefings going on, say for example a suspected terrorist individuals. Usually what has happened was one of my lecturer, her name's Jackie Baker. um the human rights organizations, like for example that the Australian government donates to, they've only given 2 years. But what Jackie says is let the human rights organizations do their programs in their own pace, making them uh, be part of the society, trying to work with the individuals, work with the counterterrorism forces, and work with people who are affected by terrorism. Usually, what has happened is Indonesia, say for example, a human rights uh, a better method can be used to combat terrorism, like from human rights organizations. They usually get ignored. For example, one in Afghanistan, for example, in one area, I forgot which area it was called again in Afghanistan. Human rights people who were there to assist the community and were there to assist the military and all, were there to try and sort out a program and all, but go to see the United States, the British military did not listen to them, and it just made a problem. So there has to be a coordinated effort amongst human rights organizations or any NGOs that can help with in the community. It's just like the Black Lives Movement, adding having an extra psychologist, for example, in a briefing or going amongst a raid, because that in a way can advise police, or advise counterterrorism what is the best method, and also can avoid an excessive force, for example. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was great, Dave. Yeah, I agree with most of those points. Definitely, human rights is neglected quite a bit when it comes to counterterrorism efforts, especially as Dave was pointing out before about torture and how states have used torture against as a counterterrorism method. Yeah, so it's definitely something that, well, I'm no expert either, so I'd be glad to hear anyone else's opinions on these questions as well. Me and Dave are writing an article right now that we're going to submit by the end of the week, so it'd be really great to have insight from others on these things as well.
Yes, thank you, Dave and Megan, for the answers.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Samsudin. So for participants, you could fill the attendee form in the chat. And I think there is one question from Abigail. What is your opinion? What rise a bigger threat globally, white nationalism or Islamic extremism? Yeah, maybe Dave or Megan wants to give opinion.
That's a hard question to answer for me. I haven't really done much research around white nationalism before, like especially on a global scale. But I have done a lot of focus on Islamic extremism. So yeah, I'll move to Dave for that one. If I can think of anything else to say, then I'll jump in as well.
Of course, in terms of what country you are, it will depend on the terrorism threats. Obviously, in Western countries, white supremacist terrorism are a greatest threat because, like I said, when it comes to white supremacists, what's the difference from the Islamic terrorists? White supremacists are against basically anything that is unless basically if you're not white, you're hated. So that is basically they're what I find is they're basically against anyone who is how to say it, not white. But whereas compared to Indonesia, if you're in a Muslim country or in a, for example, Indonesia, obviously you're going to face the threat of Islamic terrorism, terrorist group Abigail. And for Islamic terrorists, their main goal is like I said before, establishing a regional caliphate. But also their threat is against state actors and non-state actors. They just want to implement their own Muslim rule and everything, and just a place for Muslim people. And yeah, basically that's it. And the reason why the problem, sorry, and the reason why white supremacy, for example, which is gaining such a threat, is because again, maybe a change of culture and everything has, in a way, not reconciliate with them because they probably have not been shunned from society. They have met the wrong people, and two is again with Trump's administration, former President Trump, he has in a way incited more violence. So it depends on what country you are, because like I said, obviously Western countries, white supremacist terrorism, but if you're in a very Muslim country and everything, you are gonna experience Islamic terrorism. But that also depends how United States, for example, expresses their foreign policy. For example, many people are starting to suggest that a much more diplomatic approach will be needed to be adopted because the United States has been a major cause, a major problem against the war on terror. It's one of the reasons why terrorist attacks have, during 2000s, 1 to 2000, had increased in Europe, for example. So I hope that's answered your question, Abigail.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so because it's not the matter of which bigger threat, but yeah, it depends on the country as well. Because I think, let's say, white nationalism it's not really, an issue in like more Asian mainland countries. Yeah, so there is a question from Bayan Yasdani. You may ask your question.
Hello, thank you so much. Thanks, Dave and Megan, for your very insightful presentations. The research was of a very high standard, and it was very fascinating for me. My question is more about Australia's role in collaboration with Indonesia to fight terrorism. And Megan, in your presentation, you listed some of the recent major terrorist attacks in Indonesia, and I noticed, I believe, 3 of the 4 were targeting Australians. And I was wondering, in what ways can Australia further collaborate with the Indonesian government more than it currently is, or also with non-state actors to counter terrorism in Indonesia? But also, if you think that might actually provoke the terrorist movement or certain terrorist groups and organizations further, and if so, how can we counter that as well?
Yeah, so there's obviously from Islamic radical groups, quite a lot of disdain for Westerners, and yeah, I think that further collaboration from Australia would probably have further backlash, but I'm not really sure. It sounds like I haven't done my research, but I just can't seem to come to a conclusion on some of these points. Like, I go back and forth with sort of what I'm researching, and I'm not sure on this one. There's never going to be an approach that's 100% going to solve it, that I can find, from different scholarly opinions and things. There's not really one right way to go about it. I'm just not sure. That would take me, I'm the kind of person, it takes me a really long time to form sort of my own opinion on things and how I think things should be done. And I just don't have that time within this internship.
No, fair enough. Sorry to throw.
No, it's an important question. It's a good question.
It's something that our government has been considering for many, many years. And
yeah, of course.
All these departments that specialise in it, they still don't have an answer. So I don't necessarily expect you guys to either.
Yeah. No, it's definitely important, and I think it's something that we should be asking, but I just don't think that I'm the person to ask it to yet.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Just give me. I think I can answer a little bit. By the way, Brian, nice to see you shaved. You look different. So the way the Australian, like I mentioned before, one of my lecturers, when Jackie Baker, when the Australian government coordinates with the NGOs, they usually just given 2 years, and Jackie Baker has said that's actually not a good thing. You gotta let NGOs take their own time, because it is a long process. Because education system, the de-radicalization programs, it does take a long time. And just trying to reform the education sectors in any country takes around 10 to 20 years to see a success. Obviously, Australia can be an influential role. For example, like I said before, coordinating with the Densus 88, the Indonesian counterterrorism force. So, and because actually at the same time, this is also because of Australia's interest, because obviously with the rise of China, for example, they want to combat that their interests as well. And especially like just recently, I was watching a news article by Al Jazeera, how the Biden administration is now shifting resources to the Southeast region. So Indonesia is going to be a prominent actor, especially since it's going to be the fourth largest economy in the world by 2045. So obviously Indonesia will be a major player in the region, and how it can coordinate with not just Australia, but the main two superpowers, for example, the United States and China.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Maybe one question, because it's already 3 questions. And once again, for you participants, could fill the attendee form in the chat. Yeah, and such great questions as well. It will be beneficial for Dave and Megan to complete their article in our research center. And maybe in this 1 week, we could, find, or we could ask expert to what is it, to answer your questions, or the things that you need to complete in your article as well. So for our participants, this monthly discussion usually for our intern to have more insight in their short research article, because that short research article will be their their mandatory tasks in our internship as well. Anybody who wants to ask before we close this meeting? But yeah, I understand for Dave and Megan maybe the challenge because you guys in Australia as well. So this research will be more like perspective, outsider perspective. But it's fine because we sometimes even for from our own perspective, for Indonesian perspective, it could be different. Let's say for some student or some people, they tend to say, "Oh, that's good. Government really strict or really using force to this terrorism act." But for some student as well who maybe more have Islamic value or Islamic perspective, sometimes they say maybe there are more a soft approach that could be used because Indonesian terrorism act as well. Some people said it start because of the what is it? Because there is their voice. This grassroots radical Islamic. They 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 feel like if they are not use this terrorism act, the government will not listen to them. Sometimes they say that. Sometimes, but this what is it? This in the earlier of the Islamic Terrorism Act in Indonesia, for as long as I know, usually because there is hatred, hatred about I'm sorry, let's say Bali bombings, because they choose not to bomb like a public institution like school, because the hatred is much more towards other religion or maybe outsider, like say, let's say in Bali bombings or maybe in bombings in Christian church. But these days, even Indonesian themselves worried because the latest, I think, like two or last year, there is bombings in Starbucks. Although it's not there is no victims, but people start to wonder, like how what is their reason, because it's Starbucks, or maybe just some people say that maybe because Starbucks, or let's say a lot of Western food chains, they don't like it. But at the same time, there are people who always said terrorism act, Islamic terrorism act wouldn't what is it, terror like schools, because for them schools is something that beneficial for their children as well. So they so there is like shifting uh, from like hatred, obvious hatred, to I don't know, the even my own self also worried. So what is what is the next reasons or the next that they could do? But yeah, I think it's important to have more grassroots approach. Usually, and also some people link this terrorism act to uh, what is it, poverty. Usually, they they what is it? They more they enter the grassroots movement because they could approach like people in poverty as well. They what is it, they try to promise more good life in Islamic government, let's say. But it's not the truth as well. Yeah, maybe Dave or Megan have. Yeah.
Um, yes, you're definitely right on. Sometimes people are, when it comes to change, people are really scared on that. Um, but when it comes to, say, for example, when Jemaah Islamiyah wanted to start a religious war by bombing churches, in a way, it backfired against them
Yeah.
because obviously many Indonesian Muslims did not like that, because how can you attack innocent people without,
Yeah.
because you can see the violence already within there. And in fact, the front Islamic front actually started defending churches because it was wrong. So you can see individuals are people are do realize that, hey, this is wrong. But like I said, sadly, it depends. It depends on what a white supremacist or any organization, terrorist organization. People will meet the wrong crowd and
Yeah.
will join to that because of maybe drug abuse and everything. Now, I wouldn't say, obviously poverty is one of the defining factors that join terrorist groups, but sometimes even people who are highly educated will just join terrorist groups who are wealthy because maybe they see a sense of of adventure or something like that. So um obviously, like I said, with and obviously, Indonesia's, like the young people will be that, it's actually said it will probably be a defining factor for the future of Indonesia's generation and how the country will be governed. And but like I said, majority of people are against terrorism. They there will be a justice, because it is like when I was doing my presentation, people were starting to realize, like, hey, this is wrong. What are we doing? It's just a matter of, like I said, reforming that education sector and the de-radicalization programs in Indonesia.
Yeah, I think that definitely counterterrorism efforts do need to start at a political level and like with younger crowds of people. It was the point that I made in my presentation about the university in Jakarta, the Muslim university. They did that poll, and it was in the 30s. The 30% um, were okay with minorities being harmed and okay with atheists being killed. 30% and more than 30%. That's a big percentage for one university. Like these are educated, university educated young Muslim people that have these values. It's definitely something that needs to be looked at a bit more. Yeah, because these people are going to grow up with these values, and the de-radicalization programs kind of need to start there with that.
Yeah.
Um, Sorry, I don't
Okay.
mean. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt it. Yeah, but also you gotta depend, like, whether they will actually commit to that sort of violence, because sometimes maybe the questions can be redefined in some ways as well. Because say for example, people who want to correct me. Sorry if I'm wrong. Who want to adopt that Islamic teachings and everything, like majority of Indonesia won't do that, but that does not mean they support this radical idea. So it could probably mention some way, like as you said, the bombing of Starbucks. Obviously those kinds of cultures are starting to integrate into Indonesian society. Because it is seen as a place to meet with your friends. So see, you can, and as you already said, yeah, people are starting to question, why did you bomb that place? That is somewhere where we can drink, have friends, have talk, bring your boyfriend or girlfriend or anyone with you. So you can see the changes. We can see there's already that people are do in the end are against these forms of acts of violence.
Yeah. Okay. Good point, Megan and Dave. Yeah, that's true. It's not just let's say grassroots, but also the various like radical Islamic value that enter like let's say student on the university as well. And really a small example, maybe a lot of students here in the participant could relate. So usually there are small, is it like small groups, like 3 or 5 people in the uni. So they usually approach people or approach other student. So let's say that there was my experience as well when I was I think in the 3rd year. I was alone in the uni, just waiting for a friend, and then approached by 3 young women, also student like me. And then she start to ask, what is your name? From what major are you? And then she start to say like, hey, we are from this student group. I couldn't say the name, but this student group, this community. And they say like you because you are a political student, maybe you could discuss with us about Khilafah. So Khilafah is kind of the Islamic government. And I was like, I know a few things about Khilafah, but Khilafah was what is it? Was like uh, it's it's more in the Middle East kind of thing, and then the what is it the area or it's not the Khilafah system is not obviously is not suitable for Indonesia. I just say that, but they say like no, but you know Khilafah provide more blah blah more you know blah 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 and more you know more Islamic ways to do things, and then they also provide safety for minorities as well. They say that, and I was like, and then at the end they try to you know would do you want to join us to this community? And I was like, no, I mean, I'm just a regular Islam, uh, and I don't want to join that kind of like community. When just this, what is it? This community usually in the front they said like oh it's just unusual you know weekly preacher like weekly discussion about our uh, Islamic practice, but at the end of the day they try to you know gradually brainwash you. So yeah, definitely there is this apa ya this value going on between students as well. But the thing is, the community was banned. I think because people realize and discover also the uni discover oh this is not right because a lot of the students end up not going to the class anymore because they put their times in that community. So they banned it. They banned the uni banned this community. I have mixed reaction to that because at the same time this community become more invisible. So people do not know how many people in there. Before this community acknowledged by the uni, and we know which one is the member. But right now they're invisible. We don't know. So they are because they ban as well their activities banned from our university mosques. So we don't know where they you know their activities, and I think the uni couldn't control it anymore. I think at that time, instead of ban it, they could control their activities. Let's say they forbid the activities outside the uni, just in the uni amongst UGM mosque, let's say. Yeah, so that's also the thing with let's say front defender Islamic front defender FPI and Hizbut Tahrir that Megan and Dave already also researched about it uh, because the government banned it. Yeah, it seems like the thing the right thing to do, but at the same time it's I don't know. Maybe we could discover together about is that the right thing to do to actually ban all of this, let's say, yeah, radical movement. But I think that's my yeah, Dave.
Um, yeah, I can see that. I think
Mm,
yeah, sometimes like I said, banning the sometimes group organizations like Christian or Islamic group organization is bad because then you lose track of them. You don't know their
yeah.
communities, you don't know where they're hiding and what they're planning. And not only
Mm,
that, since you ban them, you just make things work and make things worse. And so obviously, I think a much more reformed approach, maybe for example, this is my suggestion. Maybe interact with another group like maybe your group for example with their group and start exchanging ideas, you know, starting a debate, and those kinds of things can be quite interesting to hear. Maybe it can change their mind. It's because I remember I wasn't there, but one of my mate, he's Christian, but and he told me like how we had a debate between his church group and a Muslim group as well. And I was like, damn, I wish I was there to listen to that, because that would have been so interesting. Imagine two religions exchanging ideas, like saying, oh, this is what I believe, or so that, I mean, those kinds of things can have an impactful thing. And know that you better understand each other. I mean, so obviously it also, like I said, I think a much more reform approach should have been. I agree with you. I think a much more reform approach would have been useful, and it's also, and yeah, and it was really impressive how you were able to also explain to them as well. Thanks, Taya.
Okay, thank you, Del, for your comment, and Megan as well. Maybe a thing or two because before we close our session today.
Yeah, I think that was definitely an interesting point that, banning certain groups can also push them further away from society and can make things worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely better ways to go around it. Yeah, rather than pushing people to be secretive, like, they're
Yeah.
still meeting, they're just banned from doing it on the uni, or banning, the uni can't know about it now, but that just makes it worse. It's the wrong approach, definitely. But maybe it would also deter some people from joining a banned community.
Yeah.
But it's not not the best way to go around it either.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Megan. Yeah, there is. I think we try to let's say find the most effective way, because let's Megan said, banning also prevent them to recruit, because at least the uni said, for all students you are banned or you are forbid to join any communities outside the uni. That's the good thing. Yeah. So I think we have enough what is it enough discussion for today. Thank you so much for Megan and Dave already present their research today. We will see in the next meeting what we could improve from your research as well. Because I think it's already time, and once again, for all the participants, please do fill the attendee form. And I think for today, this is the end of this CChat monthly discussion. Okay, thank you so much for Dave and Megan, and also for all the participants as well.